Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And Sophie fans, I've got to apologise. We're not going to be doing our special Sophie episode. We're going to have to put that off till next week.
I really do apologise because I know so many of you were looking forward to it. Actually, a few of you wrote to us and said, please don't do a Sophie Wessex episode. She's so boring. But we have just received a book that we ordered. The only book possibly ever written on Sophie and Edward. So we just got that today. So we're going to wait and do it next week. But we've already been doing some research. We've got some really weird, good stuff. So we promise it won't be boring.
And thanks to everyone who gave us feedback on last week's episode, especially the people who said they'd be interested in us talking about some of the more recent examples of racist behaviour within the royal households.
Yeah, we thought we would maybe look more generally at the working conditions of people who work in the royal household, which is what they call like everybody that works for any of the royals, and some alleged incidents of racial harassment from former staff members. But before we get into that, we wanted to do some of the more topical stuff because we only talked about it for a few seconds last week.
Yeah.
This really tender portrait of Prince Charles and Prince William for Father's Day, but they really got their money's worth out of it.
Yeah, we've seen some really syrupy stories out there following on from this, cutesy picture of Charles with his head on Will's chest.
His much taller son's chest. As Vanity Fair put it. But following on from this, we had two pretty long features in The Telegraph and online on Vanity Fair, which curiously both have the headline. They both came out on the same day, but both of them run with the headline, How Prince William and Prince Charles Became Closer Than Ever. Like, could it be any more? This is the party line.
Yeah.
Let's run with it. But let's start with the Vanity Fair one, which is by Katie Nicholl, who has written a lot about the Cambridge. She's written books about them. We know she has good sources in their camp. She says, the fact that Charles agreed to have the picture released on Twitter indicates not only that this is a natural and loving relationship, but also just how much Charles has mellowed over the years. And she quotes a family friend who says, he looks positively doting. He loves the picture and was happy for others to see it.
I'm sure he was happy for others to see it because this, is going to go some way to putting to bed all these rumours that they don't get on.
Yeah, and I guess the interesting thing about these stories is that in order to arrive at the point where they're closer than ever, you have to talk about the period when they were not so close.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it's maybe a little bit more juicy for our purposes. Like, Katie Nicholl's one is a bit softer. She says, privately Charles voiced concerns when some years back William said he didn't want to be king. But then she's got two different sources saying that they're on the same wavelength and on the same page now. It's no secret that Charles and his son have had ups and downs in the past, but the relationship today is very solid and strong.
Okay, so that's what we have to believe.
I was a little bit more interested, though, in Camilla Tominey's piece in The Telegraph, where she straight away acknowledges that it hasn't always been an easy relationship, yet William has forgiven Charles for the mistakes of the past and laid to rest the ghosts of his childhood and any soreness he has felt towards his father.
We've heard a lot about how both Harry and Will were really angry with Charles following Diana's death and generally about the treatment of their mother. So I think now this big band-aid that's going on is quite interesting. I mean, in 2017, which was on the 20th anniversary of Diana's death, William was pretty reluctant to acknowledge his father's role in Harry and his upbringing. This was a documentary that they did to mark the occasion.
And Camilla Tominey writes, Charles's aides begged William to give him the nod when he addressed journalists before the screening of this ITV documentary about Diana, but William flatly refused. Charles's only mention came in another documentary for the BBC that year when it was left to Harry to pay tribute to his father. And Harry said, he was there for us. He was the one out of two left and he tried to do his best and to make sure we were protected and looked after. Which isn't terrifically generous. And
No.
It's interesting that Will wouldn't even go that far at that point. That was
Yeah.
only 3 years ago.
to just flatly refuse to talk about it is a really big thing, like in any family, but in this family in particular.
And at the same time, you know, we've heard so much, particularly recently, about how close Will got to Kate's parents, Carol and Michael Middleton. And Camilla Tominey writes, father and son relations hit an all-time low when a previously unseen photograph of Prince George inadvertently appeared in a video broadcast featuring the heir to the throne. According to insiders, William hit the roof, and for a period, relationships between father and his firstborn cooled as Charles's bond with Harry strengthened. So it's kind of like this image of like a scales, and it's like, and on one side you have Harry and the other is Will, and it's like constantly like only one of them can be. It's like Succession, you know, who gets the kiss from daddy.
But it is really like that, because I've been thinking about, you know, like my response and now like the kind of press response to that photo that Kate took of them, and it's like, well, yeah, on the one hand, I do think it's a really cute photo, and they do seem to be like quite close and happy and stuff in it, but you just can't ever forget that for these people, they're like professional family members, and it's not just family. Family is politics with them. Family is power, and it's all brand. It's all tied together.
I do think, though, the way they've used Harry as kind of a tool in this would be quite upsetting to me if I were in his place.
Yeah.
So she talks a lot about how, you know, the bond with Harry was very close and they got along well, and he got along well with Meghan. But then after Harry and Meghan's wedding, Will and Charles worked closely together in a bid to insulate the monarchy from the crisis which threatened to pitch the Sussexes in direct competition to the House of Windsor.
That's like such an interesting way of phrasing it.
This family are so weird about competition and competing with each other.
I mean, we must never forget that a massive problem that they had with Harry and Meghan was that they were doing so much more work, and it made so many other members of the family look bad.
Yeah, and I think, you know, oftentimes we hear from people that we are just reading way too much into this and we're just gossip mongering, and that really this family operates like a boring government department. And at the same time, we hear that they're a loving family and that we are treating them like a political dynasty or something.
Yeah.
But really, you know, I mean, those two ideas contradict each other. But also, this is definitely a Game of Thrones type thing.
You can't have that high stakes in a family setting without it getting super, super messy.
And it apparently did. According to Tominey, behind palace gates, Charles was increasingly involving William in his decision-making, much to the chagrin of Harry, who felt pushed out by their away days to Duchy of Cornwall estates. He also resented William for what he perceived as pulling rank. After all, it was Diana who insisted they be brought up as equals. And she talks about how Charles and William were thrust together and trying to tackle the whole Andrew problem after his terrible Newsnight interview, and years of fuck-ups in relation to his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein that just came to a head with the Newsnight interview. But that we talked about a little before, she repeats that quote about how insiders are describing the 3 generations of monarchy working in lockstep, with the Sussexes' departure said to have fostered a newfound spirit of cooperation between the trio of households. Which is just so mean, I think.
Yeah. I think that it's inevitable that the heirs will work together, like that there will be this intergenerational thing, but I do find that the way they talk about it and the way they phrase it always seems designed to push Harry outside, like he's done something wrong. We've talked before about how often they compare Harry and Meghan leaving with things that Andrew's done, like they're in any way comparable. It just pisses me off so much.
You know, last week we had so many public appearances. We were talking about this rush of the in-person engagements suddenly after months and months indoors. Seems like they were like, okay, we can take it easy now. We've done all that, because this week was a lot quieter. Although we did see Prince William out, and he was even wearing a mask.
Finally.
As we said, those aren't mandatory here, except when you're on public transport or visiting hospital, which is what he was doing. He was visiting the University of Oxford's Oxford Vaccine Group at the Churchill Hospital to hear about the team's progress there in developing a coronavirus vaccine. So he was speaking with like scientists and a load of volunteers who were taking part in the experiments on the vaccine. And it was so funny seeing these pictures of him because they were socially distanced and he's standing there in his lab coat and goggles and mask.
This is Big Bang Theory cosplay.
But I was interested in Vanity Fair's report on this. They noted that apparently William and Kate will not be returning to London for the foreseeable future. They're going to spend the rest of the summer in Norfolk. They're just taking it up already. It's extended vacation. And that their Prince George and Princess Charlotte's school, we talked before about how Princess Charlotte's year group have gone back to school, but they decided not to send her back. And the school is now offering this 2-week catch-up summer camp at the end of term. But Kate and Will have decided not to send George and Charlotte to that, and they're going to keep homeschooling them.
We've said it before, everyone just do whatever you want with your kids.
Of course.
But when you're the Cambridges, you are setting an example, and I just think that the Queen would not have behaved like this. Not that I want to hold the Queen up as an example of parenting, but she's someone who has always known that she needs to support the government. It's not to say that I even agree with the government, but it's just very notable that Will and Kate are not towing the line in the way you'd expect.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a fucked up part of a life of service and duty. It's that you have to use your children as instruments in doing your duty, and it's really unfair, but that's how it works, and they're just copping out of it and nobody's really saying anything about it.
Yeah.
But we did see Kate this week. Most recently we saw pictures of her getting soil all over her floral dress as she was planting lavender and various other plants at an Each hospice. Each is the name of this group of hospices that she's patron of. And we also saw her doing a Zoom call during the week with Camilla Parker Bowles.
Love Camilla on Zoom.
Camilla teaming up with Kate. I like the idea that they were okay, people are bored of us doing Zoom, but you know what? We've never done an engagement, just the two of us, so at least that's a headline. So they're both patrons of different children's hospices, and it's Children's Hospice Week this week. So they did this call, and one of the kids they spoke to was this 13-year-old Stewie Delph, who did this thing where he was running 5k every day last month in a sponsored thing to remember his brother, his 9-year-old brother Fraser, who died in January, and Fraser had been spending his final weeks in an Each hospice. And Kate apparently told his mum that she was going to plant a sunflower in memory of Fraser in one of the Each hospices. So maybe that was what she was doing. It wasn't mentioned in any of the reports that I saw about the Each hospice, but sunflowers are a symbol of hospice care. So I thought that was really nice.
Yeah, that is really nice, and it's a incredible feat for this 13-year-old as well.
I know, 5k every day. My God. But Kate did say regarding sunflowers that her kids were doing a sunflower growing competition, and that Louise was doing the best, and George was pretty grumpy about that.
Which I can't help but think is learned behaviour from Will, who we know doesn't like sibling rivalry.
And we've heard so much about how Kate and Will are so competitive.
Yeah.
And these kids, George doesn't like to lose.
But luckily he's destined to be king.
But back to masks, okay? Because everybody loves talking about masks.
And they're very important. We've had a lot of lockdown rules eased, but everyone should just wear masks all the time.
And I was delighted to see Prince Harry and Meghan wearing masks this week. I could just about identify them. There was a group picture, but I can spot Meghan by her posture and her white button-down shirt. But
did you like the addition of gloves and hairnets?
I did. I loved it. I loved Harry in the hairnet.
Really good.
So they were visiting Homeboy Industries in LA, which is described as the largest gang rehabilitation and reentry program in the world, and it provides training and support to formerly gang involved and previously incarcerated men and women in Los Angeles. That was a really nice organisation for them to get involved with. It's not a particularly soft, cuddly kind of charity like kids or whatever, so I thought it was good that they were getting involved with that kind of charity.
They were preparing food for the #FeedHope program, which employs Homeboy participants to provide meals to food insecure youth and elderly people as well. And according to Father Greg Boyle, who's the founder of the group, he said, "The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were just Harry and Meghan to the homies." They rolled up their sleeves and deeply engaged with our workers in the bakery and cafe. It was immediate kinship and heartening in its mutuality.
You can tell Meghan would love that language.
Heartening in its mutuality.
But these two go way back. So Meghan was just 20 when she and her mother, Dory Ragland, joined Father Rag Boyle for a cooking workshop with Homeboy. And apparently, a source told People magazine she remembers the tamale recipe she learned there to this day.
I mean, this just is everything for me because it's Meghan doing charity work and it's Meghan cooking.
Meghan the foodie.
Meghan the foodie, Meghan who remembers recipes so that she can blog about them.
You're a foodie, right?
Why do you say that?
Because you're the only person I've ever seen order a shrimp, red pepper, and goat cheese pizza.
Well, right, but without the pepper, what connects the goat cheese and the shrimp? I'm a foodie.
We also watched a little interview, you should watch it if you haven't seen it already, Father Boyle did with Access Online, where he talked about what it was like when Harry and Meghan visited, and he tells us like sweet story about Harry comforting a woman, that he asked a woman how she ended up with Homeboy Industries, and he learns that the father of her child had just died and that she started crying and she was very upset, and he comforted her. Apparently he threw his arms around her, which I know, Tom, you were quite concerned about given
COVID,
virus.
but you know, some things are just necessary for the soul, and I like that about him, that he kind of had just this instinctual response to comfort someone who's upset.
We also heard that Meghan was speaking Spanish to some of the people that were there. She has very good Spanish, which I would love to hear Meghan speaking Spanish. And Father Boyle said,
she's very attuned to, obviously, to the sense of systemic racism in every corner of our culture and our country, in healthcare and jobs and housing and homelessness and the criminal justice system. So she doesn't need to be brought up to speed on those things. She's someone who will bring the rest of us up to speed.
I loved that line. I thought that was so good.
Yeah, that was a nice thing to say. Other Sussex news. Harper's Bazaar reported that Harry and Meghan are backing the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, which is calling for a global boycott of Facebook advertising over Facebook's repeated failure to address hate speech and racist content and misinformation on the platform. So that seems like very in line with Harry and Meghan's interests.
Oh, definitely. And a source close to them said, as we've been developing Archwell, one of the areas the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been keen to address is online hate speech, and we've been working with civil rights and racial justice groups on it. Over the past few weeks, in particular, this issue has become even more vital, and they've been working to encourage global CEOs to stand in solidarity with a coalition of civil and racial justice groups, like the NAACP, Colour of Change, and Anti-Defamation League, which are calling for structural changes to our online world.
I thought it was interesting as well, they talked about Harry and Meghan's interest in tech. So the source says, for a long time, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been working on how to move the tech industry in a more humane direction. This includes their long-standing advocacy for supporting mental health in the social media era, which apparently was part of the reason why they were visiting Stanford University back in February, and something they're also going to work on with Archwell. But the source says, a common thread in these conversations was about how online platforms have created the conditions for hatred, bigotry, radicalism, and violence to grow and spread.
It's like a massive thing to be taking on. I feel like nobody knows the answer to these things.
I know. I mean, that's no reason not to take it on.
No, of course. And that's why it's so good that they will hopefully be like big fundraisers and bring a lot of money and opportunities to the people who are qualified to sort this out.
Obviously it's something that has a much wider implication, but even from like a personal point of view for Meghan and Harry, like anybody that has spent any time in royal watching communities online will see the kind of hate speech that is directed at Meghan.
Yeah.
So you can see how that would have a kind of personal incentive for her.
And, hopefully for Harry as well, who probably had his eyes opened to the level of racism that was online, which he might not have seen otherwise.
But again, that comes at the expense of his wife. The president of Colour of Change, Rashad Robinson, and the CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson, both tweeted about how much they value Harry and Meghan's support and the thoughtful conversations that they had had about the campaign, which was nice. The LA Times, interestingly, first exclusive reported in the LA Times, reported that Harry and Meghan have signed with the New York-based Harry Walker Agency for speaking engagements, according to a person familiar with their plans. This agency also represents Michelle and Barack Obama, Hillary and Bill Clinton, Oprah Winfrey, Jane Goodall, and Stacey Abrams.
Just the big guns.
Great company to be in there. Apparently, Harry and Meghan will be engaging in moderated discussions and keynote speeches with trade associations, corporations, and community forums on social issues such as racial justice, gender equity, mental health, and environmental concerns. That sounds all very much in their wheelhouse.
Yeah. They could be earning serious money. Barack Obama earned apparently $400,000 for one speech in 2017, and the Clintons averaged $250,000 per appearance in 2014.
I don't think Harry and Meghan are going to be doing this that frequently. Like, I don't see them meeting with the Dentists Association every couple of weeks or whatever. And also, I think by doing it more sporadically, that they would be able to command a much higher fee.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. But let's get down to work.
An aristocrat with no servants is as much use to the county as a glass hammer.
I want to thank our listener Abby for recommending this book to us a few weeks ago. It's called Not in Front of the Corgis, and it's written by Brian Hoey. He's a writer and a broadcaster. He wrote a biography of Princess Anne, among other royal-related books. But this book is about what it's like working for the royal family, and he's talked to a bunch of royal staff. It was published in 2011, so just after Kate and Will got married, and he mainly talked to people who worked there years before. He said a lot of the people that he talked to are now dead, so it's not the most up-to-date stuff, but I feel like, as we know, everything the royal family does, they move very slowly.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine it will have progressed much from what he describes in this book.
They don't seem to love changing their minds about things.
And he quotes, in the early pages, he quotes the Queen describing the royal household as a tiny village in itself with all the infighting, gossip, jealousies, backbiting and intrigue one might encounter in an Agatha Christie novel.
Which, you know, is a very colourful way of describing it. But just remember, there's always at least one dead body in an Agatha Christie novel.
But you can just, like, you can see, like, Julian Fellows being like, yes, yes, yes,
Getting
yes.
that tattooed on his back.
So he's talking particularly about the people that work below stairs, or, like, the servants. Apparently they hate being called staff. So I don't like using the word servant, but they do, according to this book. So that's what we're going to use here. But yeah, so it's not like the press secretary or the private secretary or whatever. It's the service staff in all of the palaces, but particularly in Buckingham Palace. And immediately he starts off by talking about like how much they understand how little they're valued, that the royals consider their animals more important than their servants, and that the dogs aren't fully house trained, so they shit everywhere in Buckingham Palace. I know she doesn't have that many dogs anymore. I think she just has the, what are they called? The Corgi, Dachshund,
The doggies.
Yeah. She just has like a couple of them now, I think, but that...
She used to have fuckloads.
I know, and she, like, obviously she's not the one cleaning up after them, so people had to just be ready with, like, baking soda or whatever. And
Like, the Queen is like a savage.
Classy, bougie, ratchet.
She lives surrounded by dog shit and, like, bats. Like, the fuck's going on?
I know, it does make me think that, like, behind closed doors, her house is like the Osborne's house.
I live in an $8 million turd.
But they get fucking pissed off if anybody else messes up. And, like, for example, if furniture is repositioned without permission, or if one of the royals calls a servant to them and they don't come quickly enough, that the royal wrath is felt.
And it just, I can't imagine how, like, infuriating it would be to be in that situation and know that, like, this person, like, is incapable of doing anything on their own, and yet they're angry at me for, like, not running up the stairs when I hear a bell ring. Is very annoying. But, like, he says as well that there's, like, constant reminders in the way they're treated that they are basically, like, less important than the furniture, because the furniture is, like, centuries old. It's all antique and stuff and irreplaceable, apparently, unlike the stuff.
Yeah, there's no ambiguity about it. He talks about how royal servants like to know their place, and for their masters and mistresses to know theirs, which is why a lot of people didn't like working with Princess Diana, because she was quite temperamental, but that a lot of times she could be very cordial and not, like, she would go and like hang around in the kitchen or whatever, and that supposedly servants like to have those boundaries, which we also heard a lot recently around Meghan and people who don't follow these rigid boundaries.
I was really interested as well when he was saying that the senior royals, the firm, they give the impression that they're very frugal and kind of parsimonious, but it doesn't apply to what they eat, drink, wear, drive and ride, which to me seems like the entire sum of your existence. But like that they are, you know, they're used to having the absolute best of everything.
And taking it for granted.
Yeah.
And also that they value loyalty in others beyond all other things, and that servants are expected to obey without question, to stand and just let them verbally abuse you without answering back or anything. Just take it.
And that's loyalty.
I was right about my maid. She's leaving to get married. How could you be so selfish?
I particularly enjoyed all the stuff about what a fucking nightmare Prince Andrew is to work for, and just like how like ridiculous this man is. So I thought this was a good detail that he apparently just loves TV, and that he gets staff to record tons of stuff. Apparently this was back in 2011, that they had 3 years worth of recordings of TV shows that he wouldn't let them delete, but they thought that he would never have time to catch up on. Well, guess what? He's got the rest of his life to watch TV and do nothing else. Apparently he also has awful taste in food, and like he'll eat well, like when he's a good host. Apparently he will like serve nice food if he has a party. Can't see him doing much of that going forward, but privately he just like covers everything in ketchup.
It's really disgusting. It tells you so much about him though, that he's like pretending he loves fine dining to give this like impression of himself as really cultured,
and then in private he's just like, give me the Heinz.
The servants apparently are privately appalled by his decor, which I love this detail. Apparently, Royal Lodge, where he lives, has an aircraft ejector seat displayed in the front hall. And he invites guests to come and sit in it and try it out, but they're not allowed to touch the button.
I know, and he's like, one can only imagine what the house's previous occupant, the Queen Mother, would think of this. Like, apparently staff quite like Fergie, but Andrew can be very difficult. He can be difficult in the extreme. He is known for occasionally boorish behaviour, childish tantrums and mood swings.
Which is probably going to come as a surprise to absolutely no one.
And even worse, like, just... So Prince Andrew and Prince Edward reportedly both keep small notebooks handy to make comments about the service and food and drink. Comments such as, red wine not allowed to breathe long enough, or remind footmen to place spoons a little closer to the plate. I could definitely see them doing that,
yeah.
And how annoying it would be to just hand your little note over. Like, oh, sorry, can I just quickly give you some notes? From these two fucking idiots.
To which the response would be, I'm sorry, sir, I can't read it. It's covered in ketchup.
Gives you a bit of an insight to Prince Edward. We'll have more on him next week, but I just thought this was a good, weird detail.
We got like some good insight into how the royals treat each other as well. A lot of stuff on the Queen's relationship with Philip. Apparently it's perfectly normal that Elizabeth and Philip don't sleep together, but another reason is that they have different preferences for bedclothes. The Queen likes a longer turn back on her sheets and blankets and lace trimming on her pillowcases. Philip does not. No homo. And sleeps with the window wide open whatever the weather.
Oh my god.
That's the reason.
I said that even when they had the Royal Yacht Britannia, the one that the Queen cried when it was decommissioned, they had separate cabins on that there were actually not even any double beds on board this yacht, that they all had single beds. And also, because this was just when Will and Kate got married and everybody was really, I mean, everybody's still very interested in them, but they were so popular at the time. And he was talking about how one thing royals hate is not being the first choice for an invite. That sometimes they would get someone that's sending an invite and they'd be like, can this person come? Oh, and if they can't, like, could this person come instead? And they'd be like, absolutely the fuck not.
Yeah.
They had this like reply that was a very polite way of saying,
Go fuck yourself.
Shove it up your arse. But that he predicts they would be madly jealous of how popular Will and Kate are. Because the pecking order used to be that Prince Charles would get his first pick of the invitations, and then Anne, and then everyone else. But at this stage, Will and Kate were just getting hundreds of requests to go to every event.
And to, take on more patronages and everything.
Yeah.
Like, they were obviously the flavour of the month. But as a side note, when Will and Kate were getting married, the royal collection agonised for like weeks and weeks over what monogram to use on all the like merch you could buy around the wedding. So whether to use W and C or W and K, because obviously everybody was calling her Kate. It's only really the royal family that call her Catherine.
Yeah.
But they went with protocol in the end and used WC, despite concerns that the Cambridges would be the butt of crude jokes.
Because WC carries a different meaning.
It means toilet.
And they never use that word.
Another thing that I learnt from this book was that the Queen and Philip disapprove of Charles's ostentatious lifestyle, which did make me wonder what would it be like to work for Charles and Camilla.
I mean, you know what it would be like. We've read lots of stuff about what Charles is like. Kind of the most salient points are that he has the most staff, more than the Queen, and he also has the highest turnover of staff. Well, this was true in 2011, so it may have changed. That he is temperamental but very generous, and at the time the book was written, he was paying well above the going rate for his staff. His private secretary was the highest paid member of the household and was earning more than twice what the Queen's private secretary was, and that his press secretary was earning 3 times as much as the Queen's, although probably a lot busier than the Queen's given what was going on with Charles.
But it does tell you something, that you could pay your staff very well and still have such a high turnover. That means that there's something else going on. And maybe we could have a look at what it would be like to be Charles's valet. It might give you a glimpse as to why there's such a high turnover. So your day would kind of look like this. In the morning, one of his 3 valets runs him a bath. So you'd go in, you test the water with a thermometer, you put a fresh blade into his razor every morning, and then you squeeze 3/4 of an inch of toothpaste onto his toothbrush. I wonder,
no more, no less.
Yeah, does he have a special like toothpaste ruler? But there's also special valet rules for running a bath. You have to make sure you put in hot water first to warm the bottom of the bath so that the gentleman doesn't get an uncomfortably cold bottom when they sit down.
I don't want to think about that.
And you have to be very vigilant, because Charles once complained to his valet that he'd left the toothbrush with the handle facing left when he knew Charles is right-handed.
Can you imagine getting like a bollocking from Charles over what position you have the toothbrush in?
There's no logic in it.
Oh, no, but if I were to search for logic, I should not look for it among the English upper class.
Also, in regards to laundry, so when Charles gets back from an engagement, he undresses and just drops his clothes on the floor wherever. But nothing Charles wears or Camilla wears is allowed anywhere near a washing machine. It all has to be hand washed, including underwear, which must be washed as soon as it is discarded, still warm off the body.
There's something about that phrase that just really like makes me feel sick. Like as soon as it's discarded.
Also, my favourite detail, Charles makes his valets iron his shoelaces whenever he takes his shoes off, and there's no detail on like how long he's taking his shoes off for. And they've straight to whip out the ironing board. They have a little tiny iron just for the shoelace. Who knows? But apparently as well, if you're cleaning their rooms, both Charles and Camilla collect so much crap that their rooms are total dust traps and take hours to clean. Which I guess we can kind of tell from seeing the pictures of their offices, how much rubbish they have lying around everywhere. Oh, do you want to talk about Camilla's smoking?
Yeah, I was so surprised that she smokes.
You heard her voice.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was shocked but not surprised. But footmen at all the homes that she shares with Charles are instructed to place silver cigarette boxes containing her favourite brand of cigarette in every room, and matchbox holders in solid silver containers are placed upright near at hand with one match half withdrawn so she doesn't have to scrabble around for a match.
What's Camilla's favourite brand of cigarette?
Like Benson and Hedges, probably. Like real like, old man fags.
No way! The moment Camilla leaves the room, even if just for a few minutes, Camilla goes to the bathroom and you have to rush in and empty her ashtrays. Because she can't abide the sight of them.
It's not occurred to her to give up smoking then.
I also liked this detail that, as well as like hoarding everything, they are also doomsday preppers, basically. That in Highgrove there is an iron room which contains...
Game of Thrones, the iron room.
Yeah, which contains a blood supply for each of them, long-lasting food and drink, an armory and radio transmitters.
It is like a zombie apocalypse film.
Some of the less fun details then come towards the end of the book when he starts talking about prejudice and discrimination in hiring, and how at this time in 2011 the royal household was employing around 1,200 people, which included a limner in ordinary, which apparently means like a miniature painter, and a head coffee room maid.
Wow.
You could do that job.
I could do that job, yeah. Well, only for Charles, because he pays the big bucks.
But the rest of them, apparently several hundred of the staff are on less than £20,000 a year. These fucking people. Even if it's gone a little bit higher than that, I can imagine it would still be way below. I mean, they're famously poorly paid. You don't take the job for the money. As well, he says the number of black front of house staff at Buckingham Palace can be counted on the fingers of both hands. We'll get into that further in a moment. But I also was like amused by this story. Footmen are called by their first names, and one of them mistook it for the royal being friendly to them. It was one of the Queen's sons, and so he replied using that son's name, first name, and was never heard of again. Which
son do you think it was?
Oh god, I wonder who it might be. So the guy who wrote this book is like pretty pro-monarchy, extremely pro-monarchy, and like even when he's talking about discrimination, it goes pretty easy on them, I think. So he says non-white faces are few and far between. Those who run the organisation say the reason is that very few ethnic minority men and women apply. If they did, they would be considered in exactly the same way as white applicants. There wouldn't be any positive discrimination, which would be just as patronising. As far as the Queen is concerned, it wouldn't matter if a person were black, white, brown or yellow. If he or she were the right person for the job, they would get it. Her Majesty is arguably the least prejudiced person in the UK, and throughout her 60 years on the throne has entertained in her homes men and women of every race, colour and creed.
Because it's her job, not out of choice. That's such fucking bullshit that she's the least prejudiced person in the UK.
Just unbelievable. And especially because then in the next page he talks about how she doesn't really like hiring women. She prefers dealing with men, and single men in particular. Now, I don't know if you can legally do this, but that they would ask like if they had any plans of getting married and stuff to make sure that these men stayed single for her match. But she also doesn't employ any female chauffeurs.
Which I thought was such a crazy detail, given that the Queen famously drove a Land Rover in the army, and everyone's like, yes, boss bitch, she's like woman driver. And she clearly doesn't believe other women are capable of driving her around.
As I say again, this may have changed in the years since the book came out, but just that passage to me was so ridiculous. Apparently as well, she doesn't care for facial hair, so footmen aren't allowed beards, which makes me think she's probably not a fan of Prince Harry's beard.
Yeah.
And that front of house staff are of slim build for the symmetry, which is total bullshit.
So I'm just trying to work out how she's the least prejudiced person in the UK when she prefers to employ single white men, clean shaven and slim.
But he says at the end, the royal household continues to be a place of privilege and protocol, snobbery and prestige. So I thought we could look at a few examples, a few alleged examples of this. So I thought we could start... Well, most of these revolve around Prince Charles, actually, so we'll just get into those. The first of which is a woman called Elizabeth Burgess, who's a former secretary to Prince Charles at Highgrove in 2001, and the only black member of the 30 staff at Highgrove.
She took a case to an employment tribunal saying she was forced to quit after suffering years of racist abuse in the royal household. She'd worked there part-time for 10 years, and when asked whether she had ever made a formal complaint about her treatment, she broke down in tears and recounted a story about Charles's former valet, Michael Fawcett. Yeah,
we might talk a little bit about him in a future episode because he's quite a character. But she said, one time we were in the dining room and we were talking about the office Bible, the policy and procedures document that we were working on. And as I left, he said, "What the hell would you know? You're just a fucking N-word typist." As he said it, the door opened behind me and I heard the Prince of Wales call Michael and he just flushed and I ran into my office.
That is like an unbelievable thing to hear.
I know, and to claim that that is anything other than racist abuse is really shocking. So all these quotes come from the Guardian report on it. She claimed she told the personnel officer at Highgrove about the incident, but as she said, we all knew that the prince adored Michael and would not listen to anyone else, so there was no point in making a complaint because nothing would be done about it. Which is so sad, just feeling like so hopeless about that because like it's a boys' club. So she ended up resigning after a dispute over her working hours. She claimed breach of contract, constructive dismissal, alleging that Michael Fawcett and the Prince's Deputy Private Secretary Mark Bolland had humiliated her and that she was sexually and racially discriminated against.
She told the tribunal that a meeting with Bolland she had thought would be about annual leave entitlement when she returned to work after the birth of her second child, in effect turned into a disciplinary hearing, and she was told she'd have to work extra hours with no advance notice.
She ended up being replaced by the temporary assistant who'd been hired while she was on maternity leave. She said the only reason they would prefer someone with less experience who did not know as many of the prince's friends or the systems, it could only be because I was black. They wanted a white face at Highgrove and I was not that face. In the Prince of Wales household, there is still very much the old school and they've not really taken to black people. I never felt part of that team. There were always black jokes and names going around. Because it's the royal family, it's still very protected. It has its own rules and regulations. We are servants. People who work for the Prince of Wales are not employees, and to be a servant is bad enough, but to be a black servant is worse. I would never have the old school tie, and I would never be one of them, even though I did a good job. It's just like heartbreaking, like imagining this poor woman like crying, trying to explain herself to these kind of people. Unfortunately, she lost her claim, with the employment tribunal panel ruling that she had failed to prove any of her allegations. And according to the BBC, the tribunal panel chairman, Olga Harper, said that was just not the case. She has not shown that she was treated less favourably than a man or a woman who was not pregnant or not on maternity leave. That wasn't the only time this has happened.
Yeah, in 2004, another black former secretary of Charles's, called Elaine Day, who had worked at Clarence House for 5 years, also filed a case against him for unfair dismissal and sexual harassment. And her evidence included a handwritten memo by Charles, written to an unnamed member of staff in 2002, in which, The Guardian reports, he fulminates about the state of education and the uppity aspirations it provokes.
You can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Charles appears to be responding to a query from Elaine Day, who is of African Caribbean origin, about whether secretaries and personal assistants might one day aspire to become private secretaries or senior advisors in the prince's household. But she explicitly excludes herself. She says, not me, but someone else. Charles, however, is writing to someone else and says, what is wrong with people nowadays? Why do they all seem to think they're qualified to do things far above their capabilities? And he ends it by saying, what on earth am I to say to Elaine? She is so PC, it frightens me rigid.
I mean, that kind of comment, there's so much shit going on here, but that kind of comment of she's so PC, it frightens me rigid, it shows that on some level there's an understanding of how they're doing fucked up shit. but just absolutely no desire to make that change or really confront what they're doing.
And it gives you a glimpse into his mindset. You know, the kind of people who use PC as a pejorative.
Yeah.
He clearly falls in that category. Elaine Day was asked what Charles could have meant by that, and she said, "He was saying that I'm a modern woman who obviously is thinking above her station, basically. I was extremely upset and shocked to see His Royal Highness's comments in this regard. It was a household which was structured very much in the Edwardian fashion. Everyone knows their place, and if you forget it, the system will punish you." And like, this just really brought to mind all of the subtext and, in some case, text of how people talk about Meghan, and this idea of a black woman rising above her station and doing things that she's not qualified or entitled to do.
Yeah.
And like, how dare she feel entitled to any of this?
And that there's a system that's in place to punish anybody who behaves in that way. That the system is rigged to try and push people back down.
Yeah.
So she also told the tribunal that she'd been made to work in the attic during a visit to Holyrood Palace in 2003. She said, "I had been consigned to the attic with the domestic staff. I appreciate that it may seem a trivial matter, but working in the palace is about status, hierarchy, and knowing one's place. Putting me in the attic with the domestic staff and away from the office staff had clearly been done to humiliate me and remind me of my place."
Again, and like, their defense was that there is a hierarchy of staff and that's just how it works. But also, I think when you've got your only black staff member and you're sending them to the attic,
Yeah.
it's just a horrible look.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something they should be conscious of.
Oh, definitely.
She also lost her case. The BBC reported that the tribunal said she had quit and that her claims were made in retaliation for concerns raised about her work by senior staff. I did think it was interesting in Tom Bower's book about Prince Charles, Rebel Prince. He talks about how basically every case that was brought against Charles for a long time, Charles won, and that it showed that there was an inherent royalism amongst England's judiciary.
Which I'm sure isn't surprising to anybody.
So this one is not a case, but I just thought it was interesting because you might have seen this woman. Her name's Colleen Harris. She does a little bit of royal commentating now, not a lot, but she's been in some documentaries and stuff. She was Prince Charles's press secretary for 3 years, and she was the first black member of the royal household. And on the occasion of Harry and Meghan's wedding, she wrote a piece in the Daily Mail about it and about how proud everyone would be and how you had to see how modern the monarchy were for how they embraced black customs and stuff. And she said, "When I began working as the Prince of Wales's press secretary in 1998, some of the palace old guard struggled to cope with the sudden appearance of a black girl from South London. I was one of the first black members of the royal household."
When she was interviewed by The Times in 2004, she said of working in the palace, "I've always been used to being the only black person." When asked did she ever encounter racism there, she pauses, says, "I can't say that anyone was racist towards me," she says carefully. "All through your life you experience things which might be racist, or it might just be that somebody doesn't like you." Things are improving, she insists, but when asked how many blacks are members of the royal household since her departure, she is forced to say, none.
Yeah, and I saw some other pieces that, like, you know, like Brian Hoey was saying, you can count on two hands the number of black members of staff they have. Colleen Harris, though, did an interview with Gayle King on CBS last year. There was that documentary that didn't air over here, but I think it was called, like, Meghan and Harry +1 or something. And she was asked about the media treatment of Meghan and what she thought of it. And she said, "I don't think there's been anything quite that vicious about any member of the royal family before."
Which, you know, we know.
I know, and you shouldn't need to be black to see that this treatment of Meghan was vicious, but it shows that if they had more black people working in the palace, that maybe they might cop on.
Yeah.
But I thought this might be a good opportunity for us to discuss Charles's Windrush speech that he gave this week. So Windrush Day was on Monday. It's a day that acknowledges the contribution that the Windrush generation and their children have made to British life. And Charles has, like, spoken about it before, but I'm pretty sure this is the first kind of public statement he or any member of the royal family have made in recognition of the Windrush generation. So in his speech, he said, "The diversity of our society is its greatest strength and gives us so much to celebrate," which I think should be our quote of the week, because it's the closest we're going to get to any member of the family speaking in support of Black lives.
Yeah, no, I agree. He also spoke about the debt of gratitude we owe to that first Windrush generation.
Which I presume is the debt of money, the £500 million owed to the Windrush generation. According to The Guardian, only £360,000 has been distributed so far to like 60 people, when it was predicted that it would be between 200 and 500 million.
Yeah.
So this is just, to me, totally empty words. Like, oh, debt of gratitude. Like, fine, but what about these people who lost work, lost homes, lost so much for years of their lives? Some of them were deported.
Yeah.
And Charles just has this debt of gratitude for those people.
What are they going to do with that?
Like, we know that Charles is a meddler, and he has intervened before in matters of education and environmental matters with the government, architecture, like the kinds of things that he sees fit to intervene in. Whereas this is something that he could actually make a difference in doing. But it kind of reminded me of Will's speech at the BAFTAs about diversity, and just like these sort of gestures at it without any meaningful action or follow through. And like, it reminded me as well of this controversy that surrounded Charles in 2009 over this revelation that he had been calling his friend Colin Dillon, who was an Indian businessman, Sooty.
Yikes.
Which could be interpreted as a nickname based on his skin color. I don't know how else you could interpret that nickname, but people were very careful around how they described it. But apparently Camilla was using this nickname, as it was referred to, for years, even longer than Charles.
Dylan made a statement about himself. He said, "I enjoy being called Sooty by my friends, who I'm sure universally use the name as a term of affection, with no offence meant or felt. The Prince of Wales is a man of zero prejudice, and both of his sons have always been most respectful."
This was happening, this all came out at the same time as the stories about Harry using those Asian slurs in the military. But just, again, it's like, it has to be up to the non-white person to speak out and support the white person who's fucked up, and like that Charles doesn't suffer the consequences. Like,
no way.
And this person is now has to shoulder all that. Also, in 2018, you might remember Charles met a writer called Anita Sethi, a writer from Manchester, whose mother was born in Guyana. And Charles asked her where she was from, and she said, Manchester. And he said, well, you don't look like it, and laughed and walked away.
I mean, did you need any further proof that he's Prince Philip's son?
Like, it's only 2 years ago.
I know, madness.
I mean, this isn't a very comprehensive run through of anything racist or problematic that Charles has ever done. This is just stuff that came to mind while we were talking about this. But just as like a handful of examples, you might remember the picture of Charles with the iPad propped up on the books at his study in Burke Hall. And like, we talked a lot about like the pictures and stuff on the piano. But when you zoom out and see the full picture that was shared some places, you can see what looks like a Blackamoor lamp in the corner.
Yeah.
Which I was shocked. I could not believe he had this in his office and that they like shared a picture where you could see this lamp like it was no big deal.
I know. I mean, when something like that happens, it makes you realise not only, you know, this big collection of things that they have, which contains all these like really like awful things, but also the teams that they have where there was no one there who thought, fuck, we should not have that in the shot. Like, no one, it didn't occur to anybody.
But that's because like this kind of racism is just part of the furniture for these people.
Literally
like,
part of the furniture.
That's what I mean. Like, it's, you know, using the N-word and like violence and stuff, that is, you know, what a lot of people think as racism, and that's a very obviously racist stuff. But this like lived in, very insidious kind of racism, microaggressions, dog whistles, all that kind of stuff, that's what the royal family's problem is now.
Yeah.
Like, obviously you know, they can shrug it off and say, oh, well, it was my ancestors that were involved with the slave trade or stole those jewels or whatever. But even now...
It's still alive.
Yes, and in this really deep-seated, you know, the lamp in my study that nobody even notices because it's been there so long. Or like with Will and Kate, that painting that they had in their Kensington Palace office when the Obamas came to visit, and they had to put the fucking plant in front of the name of the painting so that the Obamas wouldn't notice how racist the painting was that they didn't even think to remove. Like, all that kind of stuff just shows how entrenched this kind of racism is for the royal family, and there's so many more examples, and we can't go through all of them because there's just no time. But just to remind you that, like, when we talked about the history last week, it's still something that's very much ongoing.
Yeah. But let's move on to our Fit for a Queen.
Yeah, I thought we could do a Fit for a King and Queen because it's kind of a double act this week. Yeah. I think my pick would be Harry and Meghan at Homeboy Industries because, as listeners know, we like to talk about the message in what people are wearing, and I feel like the messaging in these outfits was very clear, like even with these shitty low-res photos that were frustratingly hard to see. You had Meghan in classic Meghan outfit, white button-up shirt and jeans with gold bracelets. I'm sure they were all gorgeous pieces, but the focus was on the PPE, on the mask, the gloves, the hairnet, but also the apron. Both of them wearing aprons. Harry's had the organization's logo Homeboy and Meghan's said Homegirl. And it's like very savvy in the thinking that these photos are going to go everywhere, and the most clear way of getting the message out is to literally have the logo on what you're wearing
in black and white, as big as you can,
and the rest of your outfit is boring.
Yeah.
So the only thing to look at is this logo. And they both did it as well. Harry's outfit was so boring I can't even remember what it was. But that's the point, and it's a very smart way of using their image and using their brand to bring awareness to this charity.
Yeah, and I think for that reason, as well as many others, Meghan should be our first in line.
Yeah.
I love the detail of her speaking Spanish to people and her, like, bringing everybody else up to speed as well. I thought that was great.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that, like, none of this is new to her, and I think being at home in Los Angeles and being able to reconnect with organizations that she has worked with before or that her mother has worked with before, like Project Angel Food and stuff like that, that it is a reminder to people who say that Meghan is just trying to put on this act or, you know, whatever rubbish people say about her, that this is a reminder that she's been doing this for years, since she was a kid, and it's not an act.
Yes. Yeah.
And like you was saying, she doesn't need to be brought up to speed. She's very well versed in all of this.
But that's not all Meghan's been up to.
Yeah, we just heard like a minute ago that she made a call to Althea Bernstein, who is an 18-year-old woman, biracial woman in Wisconsin, who was the victim of a hate crime this week. She was driving on Wednesday and stopped at a red light with her window down, and a group of 4 white men called her a slur and then sprayed liquid on her face and neck and threw a flaming lighter at her, she told police, according to CBS News. And she said she pulled forward, put out the flames and drove home, and she went to hospital. She was treated for burns, and they believed the liquid was lighter fluid.
It's horrific and disgusting and like heartbreaking story.
Clearly Meghan felt quite strongly about it. Apparently she reached out to Michael Johnson, who's the CEO and president of Boys and Girls Clubs of Dane County and has also been acting as a spokesperson for Althea, and he put them in touch, and he gave an interview to the Wisconsin news site Channel 3000 where he said the three of them talked for about 40 minutes and that Althea and Meghan talked about the importance of self-care and allowing herself to heal. And she applauded her for the way that she responded and pretty much said, "Hey Michael, give me her cell phone number. I want to stay in touch. And let me know when you want me to come back and talk to people in Wisconsin."
He said that Althea was moved to tears by the conversation. He said, "She's struggling. It's a challenge for her. It's very, very emotional. I talked to her 3 or 4 times today, and I'll tell you, Meghan lifted her spirits."
That's so sweet.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, like, the power that she has and the power that maybe other members of the royal family could have if they took an interest in black people and their lives.
He said as well that Meghan had encouraged her to stay off social media to avoid reading negative comments, something Meghan is sadly an expert in at this stage, and that they spoke about faith and the fact that they're both biracial. And Michael said he was impressed with what Meghan had to say and said she sounded almost like a seasoned high school counsellor.
Oh my god.
As I heard her, I thought she has to talk to more kids, and I'm thankful she agreed to do it. And now Meghan is apparently going to be doing a virtual town hall to speak to young people in Wisconsin sometime in the next few weeks, which is great.
Yeah, very exciting.
And apparently Harry also joined the call for about 10 minutes, so he's a little bit involved as well. But we'll give it to Meghan this week, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
And hopefully we will see the two of them out again soon, even if we have to sort of spot them under their masks.
But, you know, even if they launched Archwell in the next week, we're not going to be talking about it, because next week we're doing our Sophie and Edward special.
We got this book called Sophie's Kiss,
which is such a funny name.
I know, and we got it for 20p, which tells you how popular books about Sophie and Edward are. But even on the cover of Sophie's Kiss, it's just Edward giving Sophie a kiss on the cheek, because there's no pictures of them kissing on the mouth.
Because it would just be too steamy. Too horny.
Well, we can't wait to dive into this book. We also got another book this week, which we're very excited about. It is the sequel to The Royal We by Heather Cox and Jessica Morgan, the Fug Girls. And it's called The Heir Affair. It's coming out on the 7th of July. So we're thinking we might do a book club episode about it on the 13th of July. So that would be the following Monday. Because I feel like people are so passionate about this book that they will read it as soon as it comes out.
Yeah.
So I think hopefully we're not doing that too soon. But if you're saying, no, that's not enough time for me, I need another week or two, let us know and we can move it around. But yes, so next week we'll have Sophie's Choice. And the following week we'll have the Heir Affair book club episode. So we hope you'll come back and join us for both. Thank you so much for listening to us today. And you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at AirheadsPod and on Facebook at Airheads.
And if you like this episode, please leave us a 5-star review and let us know your thoughts, or tell a friend. Tell a friend, sorry.
Or you can email us at airheadspod@gmail.com. We got some really nice emails this week.
Yeah, thanks for those.
Every time we get an email, we're like, oh my god, we got an email. And it's been a real delight this week.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. But we hope you guys have a great week and hopefully see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
I said I could drive the tractor.
Edith, you are a lady, not Toad of Toad Hall.